of our citizens, but the health, safety, welfare of the animals, because that matters in terms of what we come down with. And I think that was what was really hard with the Muddy Paws application, is that there was confusion, if you want to say that, as to what our responsibility was in that application, because it came before us as all of a sudden, oh gosh, we're also licensing this facility on behalf of the state. So can you clarify that? Because I think we need to know like what the expanse of this should be.
Well, so there are very much state regulations in terms of Minnesota rules with regards to kennels and boarding facilities. And what I'm not familiar with, and perhaps Frank or Elizabeth could share, is what the city has accepted in terms of its role in effectuating those licenses. I will say that as a standard that I have seen implemented through cities and throughout the metro area, is a blanket requirement in the code that any application must be consistent with Minnesota rules, and then outlining what those rules are. And I think that is without knowing out of the code right now what the licensing structure is for the city of Columbus. I think that is one sort of simple way to handle it and ensure that those standards are met, because those standards explicitly speak to how many times a day the facility must be cleaned, how trash must be handled, how often exterior waste must be disposed of, what happens to stormwater runoff, if there are outdoor play areas. All of that is very much part of the state regulatory structure, and I think that's a simple way. If you have not already adopted it as part of your licensing structure, it's what my recommendation would be.
And just for a brief overview, we have in the residential district, we have a kennel license if you're going to have a residential dog kennel. And then there is a commercial boarding use. But nowhere is there what I would say in our code, does it regulate licensure of dog daycare, training, grooming, or any of that under that umbrella. So there's kind of this, I won't say this void, but this area that was not explored before and not studied. So when you look at our licensing chapter, we license events and we license, carnivals and a whole host of other things, but we don't license that activity. And I think that's where the study came in. Do we want to license them? How do we want to license them? How do we incorporate what the state requires? And then how locally we want to do that. Years ago, we had a licensure for dogs, and we required, each as a residential, at the residential level, that they get a dog license, and that has since been repealed. So at the local level, we don't have a licensure, even in the residential district, if you have under 4 dogs. If you have 4 or more, you need a kennel license.
Absolutely. So I think it's a dual-pronged approach, right? So as part of a conditional use permit for a animal grooming and boarding facility, you would absolutely include, as part of the site-specific or the use-specific conditions, you would say compliance with all state rules. And then meanwhile, you could incorporate a licensing structure that you would do for any of your businesses within the city of Columbus. And so I think it's a two-track approach, but from a purely planning and zoning perspective, and I'm sure Frank will share this in terms of his study of cities across the board, it is very typical to see compliance with state rules as a minimum standard as part of the zoning application. So that's where those sort of two come together, if that makes sense.
I'm sorry, I'm still kind of confused because, in doing the research for the Muddy Paws application, there wasn't much in the way of state rules. I mean, yes, there's like, you have to clean up the dog poop once a day and things like that, but they basically delegate down the heavy lifting to the municipalities. And I think it was unclear, to me anyway, whether or not that delegation applies to all of those types of facilities or just to boarding.
Yep. So I think it applies to, aside from vet facilities, which sort of live in a different box, I think that does apply to all facilities. But what I would encourage you to do is that as you're developing the policy around this, that you think about this in both contexts, right? And so if there are missing areas where you think there are gaps in terms of the state regulation that can live within your zoning ordinance, in terms of what you want to see, how the physical site is built out and how waste is treated, or how something that I think I recently saw a city adopt was that there must be at least 5 separate spaces for dogs who are ill to be separated from healthy dogs while they wait for their owners to come pick them up. That would be one of those sort of physical site-specific characteristics that you would lay out in your zoning ordinance. And then something within your licensing ordinance would be more along the lines of your operational standards, right? So if we think about the space and the place as being in your zoning ordinance, and the how on the operations of the facility, the hours that it could be open would be something perhaps that would be in a licensing code, where someone would receive a license in addition to the CUP to operate a facility like this.
So is it correct to assume that in the licensing tract, you are also this is not just a zoning question, it's also the health, safety, welfare of the animals?
Absolutely.
Thank you, that's what I needed to hear. I think that's what was unclear as we went through the muddy paws.
I'm still not clear. Is there another entity that checks on this, just like in beauticians, they go and they check the hairdresser? So there's nothing for
It's the city.
grooming?
No, it's the city. I think that's what was my question. It would be the city's responsibility, which is why we have an animal control official.
And I
They are-
understand animals being held overnight and large numbers of animals. But I'm talking about somebody who has a business where you're just grooming the dogs in the house or in the whatever you rent. There is nobody that goes in and checks those?
I think that's the city's responsibility as part of the licensing, isn't it?
Well, I think two different answers to that question. Number one, there is a general state regulatory structure for people who do animal grooming, just like there would be for nail salons and estheticians and things like that. Those oftentimes, and depending upon the relationship that the city has with its county, and then the relationship that the county and the city has, the person who investigates any violations of those and reports back to the state may very well be the city. And as I understand it, that the Anoka County does not do investigations of that sort, and instead the city has taken on that responsibility.
Correct. So to answer, just so I'm making, that would be something, if we move forward with assuming that responsibility, that we would have our animal control official do? Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I think what you're thinking is, and this is where I was confused too, is, you know, if you're a beautician, there's the Board of Cosmetology that comes and inspects your facility. There is no such entity at the state level for these facilities. There's the Board of Animal Health, which sets some broad guidelines, but they're not an enforcement agency in this capacity.
That's correct. So they conduct the initial licensure, saying that, yes, you have proved up that you have the space and you have the training to provide these services. But once the license has been issued, there's not a regulatory structure that sort of sits underneath it like there is for other agencies.
That helps, thank you.
All right. Yeah. So moving along with this slide here, I'm just kind of curious if then, especially after what we've heard so far tonight, if these are the main, basically, are these the main questions? If so, that's great. If not, what should be added? What should be taken out? But this is what I gathered after reading the moratorium ordinance and resolution. So I wasn't a part of those meetings. I did read some of the minutes, but I think that would be helpful, making sure I'm looking at the right questions, because I don't want to come back with a bunch of answers that isn't what we're looking for, so.
I do think this is Janet, I mean, I do think these are the right questions. I just think you might want to expand it beyond just the boarding and grooming that you have at the top to include the training and daycare, or, broaden that.
Yeah, I have it phrased a couple, because the way it is with the, I can't remember, the moratorium ordinance is phrased one way, and then the resolution is another. If you, the first slide, it has pet boarding / grooming, that's why, it's a pet boarding / grooming study, but the overall is about, states small animal indoor boarding, grooming, and daycare. So that is what my focus is going to be. I just kind of kept the language similar between what was written in the ordinance and resolution. But yeah, I will definitely be looking in the broader scope of doggy daycare or like
I
kitty
think that
daycare.
the training is the thing that I
training.
think that is really lacking in how we defined it initially. Training facilities.
I have just a general policy question, and maybe Megan, you'll be able to help us out here. So from what I understand, this is going to be, there's going to be two, like almost two prongs to this. We're going to have licensure come out of our licensing chapter, which is chapter 4. Chapter 5 is our public nuisance, chapter, which talks about, it does talk about animals, but not in the same way. And then we're, in our chapter 7, we have planning and zoning. So should questions really 2 and 3 be structured that way? In other words, should 3 be allowed around licensure? In other words, what's required for this license? And then number 2 should be under the conditional use permit, because I'm assuming that's what we want, but I don't want to say that, you know what I mean? But planning and zoning is going to be either an interim use permit or a conditional use permit. And then under that, what is it you want to, what types of requirements should be under? So I'm applying for my permit. I know that when I come in the door, if I have dog daycare, that I have to apply for a license. And under chapter 4, there's going to be criteria. And then I'm going to apply for a conditional use permit because it's going to be in a certain zoning district. And you're going to require me to give you certain things like, here's my building, this is my runaround area, this is where I put dog poop, I mean, you know what I mean, et cetera. So did I get that? Is that the structure we're going in? Because then the questions are going to be framed a little bit different.
Yes, I think that's an accurate summary of what we talked about tonight. And I think it also sort of, it helps us to separate out sort of the physical standards from some of the operational standards that you might be considering. And as we talk about those issues, those two may intersect, and it may be appropriate for something that you originally think of as being in the licensing box to be in the hypothetical conditional use permit box, and vice versa. And just to maybe to give some examples that are helpful to talk about, what we typically see in our licensing ordinance, when we talk about selling alcohol, that you can't have someone who's under 18 in the same space as a person, as in the same area as the person who's selling alcohol. Like, there are some of those sort of operational restrictions. I didn't say that exactly right, but that's...
But when you get your restaurant permit, you're in the planning and
Right.
zoning. You know what I mean? So
Exactly, yeah.
All right. Yeah, it sounds like then I'll be tweaking these questions a little bit, just to what Elizabeth and Megan just said. But I guess then, is there anything more broader scope that you think should be part of these study questions? I know there's going to be a lot of more detailed stuff, and I'm actually going to start on that a little bit tonight. with a few questions I want to ask right away. But just big picture, is there any other questions that we feel should be added? And also, just want to make sure, am I still speaking in here clear enough? Okay. Doesn't seem like I'm hearing anything. Sorry, I don't know if everyone's still thinking, but if you want, I can move on to the next slide. Oop, I'm sorry. There we go. So yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and get started on some additional concerns. First, just kind of off the top, well, of everyone's head, are there any specific commercial zoning districts where you believe these facilities should be prohibited?
I think you have to consider each of the facilities independently. When you group them together, it gets very muddy in my mind. I mean, grooming is, a grooming facility to me would be a much lower impact than a training facility, depending on the kind of training. I mean, if it's obedience or puppy, socialization training, that's really different than if they're training hunting dogs outside with, guns that shoot blanks or guns that throw, retrieving dummies and sound like an actual gun. So I think you have to separate them out to answer that question, because I think the impacts are different.
Okay.
This is Barb. Didn't we discuss this in November of 2021 with the, where we separated on page 64, mixed use, and we outlined what districts they were to be included in? Says medium density district, mixed use, high density district, commercial district, general commercial district, highway commercial.
I think that was prior to the moratorium, wasn't it? So I don't know if we're revisiting it, or I'm not sure.
That's what I was questioning.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it's asking, and we've already pretty much decided previously.
So is the answer you want it to remain the same? You're going to only allow it in, and I don't know what Money Pause's district is off the top of my head, because those names are just very similar. Because the question for the training facility was, can I be located in I want to say it's highway commercial?
I think it was, yeah.
Can I locate there, and is that a good place for me? And I think that's where we said, we don't really know where a training facility should be. Yes, we had doggy daycare, but what about these other facilities? Where should they go? And if your consensus is, yep, we want to keep them confined and we want them all in one area, and where it's currently located, and Frank, you'll have to tell me what the name of that district is. I want to say, I know it's red. I know the color. If that's appropriate, and we don't want it in the pink, which is the highway commercial, or the brown areas, then it's pretty easy. We'll only keep it in one district.
I think you have to consider the individual businesses. I mean, I think the question that came up with that person who was interested in the training facility was that it was unclear what kind of training it was going to be, and whether it was outdoors. If it was outdoors and there was, as I said, they were training hunting dogs, or they were training guard dogs or something like that, would that be a nuisance to the adjoining facility or adjoining businesses in that district? And I think that was in large part why we said we got to study this better. So I think, Barb, we did kind of do a cursory with the zoning, but I don't, I think this was the reason we called the moratorium, is that it's more complicated than just lumping everything together into these small animal facilities and saying, yep, it fits here and it doesn't fit here. I think you have to look at each of the individual types of businesses.
Yeah, that's what it says here, is that you're listing boarding, breeding, training, and grooming all in the same commercial kennel. So you feel that,
I think the training is really different. There's lots of different kinds of training that can happen. And I think some are all inside, wouldn't bother a soul, and others are not. And if you just lump them all under one, you could really be creating a problem for adjoining businesses or neighbors.
right, that's, by grouping them like that, there's a lot of districts here where something like that wouldn't belong. And I think that's what the discussion was.
Yeah.
So what would we do then? Make up a separate category for each type of facility?
I think you would do a definition of what training facilities meant. And maybe there'd be different categories of training facilities.
Because you're right, it's vague this way.
Yeah, that was the problem. We didn't define it. We didn't have definitions of those things. And I think, that's probably one of the things we'll have to do.
Yeah.
What if you allowed it in all the zones, but then just said that if you have something that's outdoors, it would have to be contained in the cup or interim use permit or whatever?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it would depend on what the group feels, but if it was outdoors, maybe you would only want it in one or two zones, and if it was all indoors, it could be in any zone. I mean, I don't know.
What I would like to add is, if you go to the wellness center on West Freeway Drive, used to be the radio station, you can hear those dogs screaming all day long. And they're indoors, but they let them out to play, and probably to eat or something. And if you're a neighbor or another business next door, it's absolutely questionable if you would like to be next door to them. So I think that's one part of the equation. Where can they be that they're not, have 30 dogs yelping at the top of their voice and interfering with whatever business is next door? And you can go up there any day, park in the parking lot, and you'll hear it. So, but when the first Muddy Paws was issued, their IUP or CUP,
IUP.
I don't think it was thought of, or we had no experience with it. Now we have the experience, and I think that's what we want to, one of the points that we want to discuss. And also, is it a good use for a piece of property up near the entrance and exit ramps? Is that where you want that, or should it be somewhere down on less valuable, less important property than right on the intersections?
But then Muddy Paws is a good example in that it is not a training facility. It's a boarding, and they happen to let them out during times of the day. So what I'm saying is, if they keep the dogs inside, is there any place we would not want them, right? I was trying to go at it a different way rather than trying to, striate the commercial and the light industrial and whatever, red, green, purple, whatever. I was trying to say, I don't think the dogs are unwelcome if everything's inside. Do you think Muddy Paws, you can hear the dogs inside?
I don't know. I mean, I know that, I think it was Pam, who does massage at the wellness center, said it's, when you're trying to get someone to relax, there's dogs outside barking, you kind of kills the zen of trying to do. But if everything is inside, I mean, maybe the only thing you have to think about then is traffic or parking or stuff like that. So, But I think that's all part of the study, right? That's all part of what we get to try to figure out.
Yeah.
But we don't have to do it tonight, right?
No, we don't have to go too deep into this. I think actually what I've heard so far is very good, separating these out, and that's how we're gonna look at, you know, whether training and which type, you know, specific type of training, which district it might go in, which ones it might not, different for daycare. But I do want to ask if there is right now, I know we don't want to lump everything together, but if there is anything that immediately pops out that we should, wouldn't want any one of these facilities in. And if not, that's, we can go about it each individually, but I don't know if there's anything that just right away it might seem like even indoors, the most easygoing type of facility. We don't want it there, so we don't want any of them in a district, if that makes sense. Sorry, that was a little bit rambly.
Well, I feel it's not needed up in the high-density area, next to the Caribou apartment or any of that.
The mixed use, high-density mixed use.
Yeah. I mean, farther down, what is the light pink, Elizabeth? Away from the,
That'd be, oh, I think general business, the one that's on the border with Forest Lake.
yep,
Okay, yep, that's general business.
you know, something away from the most valuable, most expensive property.
But you know, like in the high-density mixed use, I mean, I don't think there'd be a problem with having a grooming facility there, and especially if those apartments are going to allow dogs. I mean, that might be actually a welcome service. And they don't, you know, it would be just like any other little, you see them a lot in strip malls now. So I don't know that you'd want to say grooming couldn't be there, but maybe not a training facility. I don't know. But grooming's pretty low impact. I mean, they're there for a few hours, they come in, they go, and especially if there's going to be dogs allowed in the apartments, which I thought there was, that might be a really nice thing for them to have in that area. So I guess what I'd say is let's not try to figure this out tonight when we haven't really had time to think about it or have information laid out in front of us.
Sure. All right, with
I just want to make one clarification for Frank. From what I gathered here is the direction for Frank to have 3 buckets: pet grooming, pet training, pet dog care? And we're not going to have one label on all 3, but there'll be 3 different distinct uses. So he'll have definitions for those distinct uses, and then you will decide what districts they're in.
Yeah, don't you think that's good? I mean, boarding and training is where the dogs are going to make the most noise, right?
Yeah, I think the thing that I guess we have to think about is that a lot of times there are facilities that do more than one. So you've got, and I don't know if should be a designation between a dog daycare, which is drop them off in the morning, pick them up at night, and a boarding facility. But I mean, you've got multiple iterations of businesses that do all of that, some parts of that, and so I just think you're going to have to kind of march through all the different scenarios and think about it.
okay.
So again, and that's good, because then Frank will look at principal uses, accessory uses, and those sorts of things, but have some distinct, you know what I mean, definitions of each, and then you can mix and decide whether we want a drive-through pet grooming place.
Well, and some of the pet stores do have grooming, and they even have minimal vet services, like shots and so forth. So that's another.
I agree. I think there's so many people thinking outside the box right now that you can't imagine the phone calls we get about different uses, what people would like to do. So I do think that you have to have some guidelines, and then the ones that are really out there we'll just bring before you.
So also add to your list, there are facilities, they're almost like car washes. So you drive up with your dog, there's a place that you can wash your dog
Yep.
and dry your dog, and it's all, so you don't have to mess up your house doing it. They're great, but again, I don't know, that's sort of different than a groomer,
Right.
so.
Which, again, that's what I said, we're, thinking outside the box. I've heard just about everything on these things, so.
What a fun project for you, Frank.
All right. So I will be looking into that. And then for my second question, Elizabeth, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. My second question would be based off of what I read in the ordinance calling for this study. Are there any specific nuisance concerns? Like, I know I put sights, sounds, odors, but maybe a little bit more. Obviously, those are all going to be a factor, but a little bit more detailed. Are there nuisance concerns that the planning commission or city council have for these types of businesses? So this would be more chapter 5, right, Elizabeth? Nuisance?
Nuisance is chapter 5, yes.
I live mostly in 7, so.
Well, I think those are the three major concerns.
Sure.
What you're hearing, what it smells like, and what you're looking at. If they put up a tip-up building when you walk in with your poodle and come back in 2 hours, that's not a problem. When they've got hunting dogs out in the parking lot, shooting shotguns over the cars, that's when the problems, that's what we don't want to,
Okay.
that's what we don't want to have to deal with.
I think the other thing to consider is some training facilities train for agility, and that's typically done outdoors. I mean, you might train indoors, but then they do the matches typically outdoors. So you don't have guns and things like that going off, but you do have dogs running the course, and obviously when there's dogs, there's barking dogs, so that's something else to consider, that type of training.
Gotcha.
Isn't it true that there was somebody who was interested in putting a dog training or boarding or something down at the end where they were going to have each individual building and then lease it out to different people? Do you know what I'm talking about? So,
I know the facility you're speaking of. I hadn't heard a dog facility in there, but the facility that was called in earlier this year was where the exercise place is, and that's where they wanted to do training.
exercise equipment? Okay, so this is my point, and I don't even know how to address this in an ordinance. Okay, the Muddy Paws was put in a building that was not made for dogs. It was put in a building that was, auto repair or something, and they morphed it. And as I understand, the owner of that business then went to another community and set one up in a strip mall. Well, I don't think we want to have dogs in this type of thing. First of all, tax-wise, it doesn't make sense, and if they want to go down to a big building like we were talking about, where they lease it out, and it's a big, I think they're tip-up buildings, aren't they, that they wanted to do, or?
I haven't seen his, we saw his concept, but he was talking about steel, buildings with veneer, you know what I mean? Veneer. The steel building with veneer on top of the steel, not the steel frame with veneer. So I don't know. He talked about renting, but he didn't really give us a really good idea on who he wanted to rent to. And I think that's where we came down on, was there going to be a big conditional use permit, and we were going to give them certain uses that they can have in each building. But in this case, I don't know how you can do a blanket CUP not knowing whether it's going to be Dog
Right, and
training, dog,
I'm not
you know.
concerned about the CUP or how he's gonna do it. I
Yep.
was trying to give the example that those buildings are more substantial than, let's say, the exercise, or they're more conducive to the dog thing. So I don't know how you put that in the ordinance, but I don't want people coming in and thinking that they can just throw a doggy daycare or something into some of these buildings that are not really very soundproof, or they're next to somebody that probably wouldn't be appropriate, like, I don't know who's, I mean, I don't think he would bother the boat people, you know, if they're in the exercise thing, but I guess what I'm saying is that that's not kind of what we want. And unfortunately, people come in and they see buildings that are available, and, you know, how would we feel if they wanted to go into Gander Mountain? I mean, you know.
You know, you're right, because one of the problems with Muddy Paws was the ventilation, and and that's like huge. When you have a boarding facility, you have a lot of dogs in a small area, you need to have really good ventilation, and that's part of the state requirement too, to be able to keep down humidity and regulate temperature and things like that, and that was very challenging for them to do in that building, because it was built to be an oil change, I think, like a rapid oil change or a tire change or something like that.
It was
So-
lawn care, lawn care. He sold lawn care, but he did have a little service area. And then after that, yes, it was A1 Tire, which is a tire place, yeah.
So I think you're right, Shelley, for more than just the value of the property. I think, you know, if you end up being responsible for licensing, that was one of the challenges that existed in that building for Muddy Paws, was that the ventilation was hard to do correctly there because of just how it was built.
But when you see a multi-use facility like training, boarding, social rooms for the dogs, I think of Blaine. They got one down there, and I can't remember the name of it, but.
Oh, I know what you're talking
You know,
about, yeah.
I mean, you go there, it is a substantial building, and they're set up to do the dogs properly.
Yep. There's one in Ham Lake too, on the Run. It's a tip-up building that they do all sorts of different kinds of training, and they do some grooming and stuff there. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
In the cities, they usually go to the warehouse districts because the noise is, you know, it's not a problem.
And I think that's what started all of this, was when they came in and wanted to do the exercise building. And is it the best use for the building, for the property, for the location, for the neighbors? And I think that's what that's a decision we have to make. And what's best for the animals too.
Yep.
And I think that'll go back to kind of what we got out of question one. Some of these facilities will have different things that may make it that it fits one place but may not fit another. So I think this is a lot of great feedback, and it's really going to help me going forward and what I should be looking into and what approach I should take. Yeah, if there's any other nuisance concerns that anyone thinks of right away, I think we've hit on some good specific ones here, and I appreciate that. But otherwise, I'll go on to my third question of the night. All right, so one of the things that the study called for was design standards, and I'll admit, I think some of that actually, just through the discussion so far tonight, I'm kind of understanding more as to what design standards we're talking about, things like muffling sound and just what Shelley just talked about, I think went a long way in actually answering this question. So I don't know if there's any additional design standards that would be a big concern for the Planning Commission and City Council.
I mean, other than ventilation.
Ventilation.
This is Chris. Wasn't there an issue too with Muddy Paws with the washdown?
Yeah, and so I think that gets, and you can chime in here, Megan, I mean, that's more the operational side of it, you know, how they disinfect, how they clean, and
But the materials
how it's built to
need to be-
facilitate that, the impervious surfaces, and not having things be able to run from one dog run to another, so that there's, you know, separation between the two that is leak-proof.
You were talking about the porous surfaces?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if those are design standards or if those are more in the operational realm, because it's interior.
And I think I think you'll find that cities handle it different ways. But in particular, Apple Valley handles it as a design standard with regards to their commercial boarding and grooming facility, as does Lakeville.
Perfect. Is there anything else that comes to mind right away? Otherwise, I will go on to my last question for this. So my last question that I wanted to ask, and I think we've gone through quite a bit tonight that kind of answer this question too. So if there's anything, and I know just reading through the minutes, kind of what we're going to be needing to do the minutes for the Muddy Paws facility, what kind of controls and whatnot that we'll need to do moving forward. But just since this is the last question, if there's any kind of last thing anyone wants to bring up right away, I think now would be a good time just to have me hear that so I can make sure that's a priority.
Frank, I don't know if they're lacking in the ordinance as it's written, but again, the same old thing of sound, sight, and smell. That's the big, I think those are the most important issues. If you have a big brick building and you can't see anything or smell anything or hear anything, it's much better than a repurposed pole barn.
Sure.
With the dogs yapping day and night and
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. So as you're going through your material, keep that in your mind. I think that's important.
Awesome. Thank you for that feedback.
Anybody else?
I have a question, but it's not about your 3 questions, it's about the what's next. So are you going to go over that?
Yep, that's actually going to end up being the next slide here.
So I know the plan is to do this during planning commission meetings, which that's fine, but I really don't want to set this up like we've just lived through with the residential zone business, because I feel like this is another example where it would be best done jointly. Now, that's just my opinion, so I'd rather have everybody else weigh in on this, but I don't like the idea of the planning commission spending all sorts of time and effort in doing a really good job, and then the policy stuff kind of overturns a lot of that because it's not what the planning commission is typically thinking about when they're looking at this, you know, zoning and land use and that kind of stuff. And so I'm just throwing it out there, not that I want more meetings or anything, but I feel like I don't want it to be a dissatisfier for people who serve on the planning commission to spend an inordinate amount of time and effort on and do a really good job, only to have things kind of turned over because the policy questions that the council have upend the decisions that they, or the recommendations that they have. And I think we saw that with the residential zone business discussions, so I don't want to repeat that. So I'm just throwing it out there for others to comment on.
This is Bob. I think that's sound advice.
This is Sue. I agree. I think we should do it jointly. That makes sense.
So how would we do that, Elizabeth? Turn one of the planning commissions into a joint?
Well, there's a list of meetings, I don't know, I mean, I don't know if it impacts that, but I just thought I'd bring it up now before we get too far into this, because I just feel that's the most efficient way to do it, but I think from a job satisfaction perspective, it's also the right way to do it when you're dealing with, there's a lot of policy in here. This doesn't exist in our ordinances right now. And so this isn't just about tweaking some building design standards or things like that. I mean, there's a lot of policy questions here that I feel it's really unfair to throw that in the laps of the Planning Commission without a lot of input from the council.
I think we can set up the schedule that way for the joint meetings, and we can put that on there. December 7th is already scheduled for 2 public hearings, and so I think there's a pretty big application in there, so I don't know that there would be time for a joint meeting, but certainly on the 21st, there's most likely time, and then probably January 4th. And while I think there is a dog kennel in the mix, I think because those are generally pretty quick. Even if we were to convene a planning commission meeting for a short hearing, we can certainly have a joint meeting on either side of a kennel application. So I think we can fit in a couple of meetings. I do think it will make an extra meeting on the end of January.
Yeah, and I might be able to tweak this a little bit too, now that we've kind of discussed this, and maybe we can condense things down and combine things, just so we can kind of get it. I don't want to take the city council members' time and make extra meetings, but I do understand that it is important for the council members as well. So I mean, definitely December 7th, we're just not going to have time, but otherwise I probably will tweak a little bit. Now that we have, I'll go backwards from that, just do a quick review of tasks for me. Things I highlighted here, making sure that I shift a little bit of the wording on questions 2 and 3, based on what Elizabeth and Megan both said. We're going to be kind of parsing out the different types of facilities as I move forward, and I'll be defining these different categories. And then just march through the different scenarios, look at different things as far as principal uses and accessory uses go. Yeah. Seems like and then, yeah, among other things, sight, sound, and smell are going to be really a big focus for me. Just outwardly, but obviously, like with design standards, like there's going to be ventilation and things like that. So those are what I took away from this as my main things going forward, and we'll be looking at land use next time at the very least. So I don't think that one should, once we get definitions, go a little bit quicker. But if there's any other things that the commission or council would like to put on my task list, now would be a great time to know. right. It seems like, and if something comes up in someone's mind driving home tonight, feel free to email me. I'm definitely open to that, but given that, I will turn it back over to the mayor, who will turn it back over to me.
Thank you, Frank. All right, on to number 6, the Wyoming Comprehensive Plan, final draft review, pages 16 through 25.
So that's going to be in the main agenda packet, about halfway. Because I just had a memo for that one. There's some maps in there that didn't convert too well anyway, but that's the addition. It's gonna be so if you go to page, you can actually just go to page 17. Nope, that was it. Gotcha. I definitely forgot that yesterday during park board. I did not share my screen the entire time, so I hear ya. Yeah, just to start, we received Wyoming's draft comprehensive plan last month. And just a quick background, Wyoming is not part of the Met Council, so that's why their comp plan didn't come in with everybody else's. Like, I think it came in I guess it'd be 4 years ago now, for everyone to review. So they still are required to send it to neighboring cities, but they do have different requirements as far as like compliance and enforcement. It's not the same as it would be as another Met Council city. But as you know, or as I'm guessing most people know, Wyoming shares a short border with our city here, Columbus. If you look at that map there, Elizabeth, do you kind of know where, it's basically right where that, they're both yellow, but the two yellows kind of meet on the left-hand side towards the bottom. If you can show with your mouse. But basically south of there, that's where the Columbus and Wyoming border is. So there's not too much going on, to be honest. There's 3 different designations by the border. There's wetland areas in Wyoming that border wetland areas in Columbus. If we remember the variance that went through here a couple months ago, that we gave the variance because there was so many wetlands on that property. That's right next to the wetland areas designated in Wyoming. There's also a very small portion of single-family residential that is going to be in their sewer district. I think it's their phase 1 of sewers. So I think that's literally 2 properties, and part of that is parkland that goes up against 2 really small parcels that Columbus owns along Lion Street. And the remainder, which is what most of the border areas are going to be, is just a semi-rural neighborhood. If you go down a little bit further, Elizabeth, I'll talk a little bit about our main connection between the two cities, which is Kettle River Boulevard. That is a Anoka County road here in Wyoming, or here in Columbus, and it's Chisago County in Wyoming. That is expected to have heavier traffic. Now, that's going to be more up towards Highway 35. If you could go down one more. Perfect, yeah. So as you see there, they list Kettle River Boulevard as a collector. For us in that area, we had it in our comp plan as a local street north of Broadway. So they may also add a bike trail. So those, that might be another connection. That's in the last slide there, or not slide, page. Kind of their parks and trails and open space plan. So I reviewed it, Dean reviewed it as well, and we came to the conclusion that the areas where there may need to be future coordination is really Kettle River Boulevard, but that's going to be our two cities along with the two counties, because that's a county road in both cities. So if it needs upgrading from I-35 and then especially, or I say especially because I did park board last night, if a trail is proposed and they have it in their plan, it may be off-road, it may be a shoulder trail. Those are things where we would need to coordinate. Otherwise, there really wasn't much to this. So,
This is Bob.
Yeah.
Frank, can you tell me what the current census data is for population of Wyoming? I mean, instead of going back to 2018,
yeah.
because if you look at 33% on today's current population and calculate the amount of additional traffic that's going to be going through our streets based on that growth, that concerns me.
Here. So the current population estimate is, oops, I gotta get to the right city.
That'd be 2022 census data, right?
This might be American Community Survey, which is done by the census, but I can look for the actual.
So like if you just take the old data, like in 2017 is almost 8,000 people. And if you just take that times 30%, that's an additional 2,400 people just based on old data. If it's to meet the additional growth that's anticipated, and this is not even through the Met Council because they're not part of it. So I don't know where these projections are coming from, but 30% growth, I mean, can you imagine Columbus growing by 30%?
1,200 people.
Yeah. I think, this is Chris again, I think the biggest area of traffic is Kettle River, with the new development that's going on on both sides of Kettle
Right.
River up in Wyoming.
Summerfield, Sunnyfield, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you got to remember that Wyoming, 90% of it's on the other side of the freeway.
Yeah.
Right, no, I get that, and I think you're looking more at with the development that's going on right up there on
the west side.
on the
Yeah,
west
Moxness-
side of the
Yeah.
freeway.
Moxness development?
Yeah, and it's
Yeah, 'cause
only going
they're-
to continue growing this way, I think.
Well, yeah, well, I don't know about that, but,
They don't have 5-acre limit.
no, they don't, but they're also talking about a roundabout up there, up on the Viking. I mean, I don't know, I just heard this through the grapevine, but I know it's a heavy, that road is, in the last 30 years, has gotten unreal. You can always tell when there's an accident.
So then how do
Yes,
we
you
adapt
can.
to that? You know what I mean? Is kind of, I think, where our focus should at least concentrate on some of it on traffic.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm still trying to find that population, unfortunately, with
It
Google.
it also impacts our schools,
It certainly does, yes.
because my daughter is now 32, but when she was in kindergarten and I was there, Wyoming was a problem at that point because they were expanding, and they're in the Forest Lake District, at least part of them are in the Forest Lake School District, and they were busing the children down to Columbus over here in the
Sure.
elementary, and we exploded from like 18 in the kids in the class to 20-some.
Yeah, and Forest Lake continues to decline in the school.
And in answer to your earlier question, the population in 2020 was 8,228.
So it actually went down then from 17. Okay. Or just up slightly, I guess.
Yep, about 410. Yep.
So I'm not sure what you're asking us for, Frank. Maybe you can summarize. I mean, I know what we do when we get other people's comp plans is that, I mean, there's very little that we can say, like, you can't grow your city, or you can't do,
Yeah.
I mean, so.
There's Mr. Mayor, there's a hand up also on the screen. I think this is an opportunity for you just to give feedback, and that's what Wyoming is looking back. If you're, concerned about traffic on Kettle River, you might want to say, you know what, you need some traffic control at 22 in Kettle River. You know what I mean, with the increased, population. You're right, you can't tell them not to build houses, you just can't do that. But certainly, the other thing I would say, if you want a bike trail, if you're really interested in a bike trail on Kettle River, then say that. We're interested in working as a partnership on a bike trail on Kettle River. Now, I don't want to speak for the park board. I don't know if you want a bike trail on Kettle River, but again, that's the whole opportunity. That's the whole reason why they're giving us the comp plan. So we have this one-time opportunity to give comments.
Right, I mean, I think, based on the discussion at the park board last night, I would say that there would be interest in that. I mean, we're planning a master plan for 10 years out, and I'm sure this is several years, if not at least 10 years out, too. I mean, that's the way comp plans are. They're 10-year planning tools, so I definitely think we could, let them know that that would be of interest to us. I just wasn't sure when you talked about like their interim sewer service area and the number of homes that are right next to it. I mean, that's not anything that those homes would connect to or would have an option to connect to?
That's a much more complicated thing as far as capacity and whether we wanted to enter in a joint powers agreement. Again, it's not that it couldn't happen, but there would need to be a reason for that to happen.
Also, we're getting out of the 7-county sewer service area, and I don't know how that works. So that might be a little bit dicey too.
So it sounds like the 2 points of concern to comment on are the traffic and or not of concern, traffic and the potential interest in a bike trail sometime far in the future.
So how do we get this information back to them? Do we need a motion or a?
You would put it into a motion to let Frank know to draft a letter to the city of Wyoming to include your comments, and then they in turn share it with their planning group and/or council, and then they either update their plan or make some changes. And I do believe the comments also go to Met Council so they can see what other communities commented.
Even if they're not part of the Met Council?
This plan is being reviewed by Met Council.
It is, because it borders it? Because it's not a Met Council city, is what Janet was asking.
But I do believe they do review it. I
Okay.
don't think they do, I don't think they're just doing it independently.
Sure.
I didn't read the letter.
because it doesn't have the same requirements that Met Council City does, though, because I know Dean pointed that out to me.
Is there, so in the letter, they said there's, and I didn't see the letter coming to you. Is the review body the city? Is the city just doing this independently?
As far as I'm aware, it's doing it independently.
Okay,
I don't think it's county mandated because I think that'd otherwise be the only other entity that would be involved.
This is Bob. I don't know if WSB is their city engineering firm or if they've contracted WSB to do this study, but it seems like we should have Kevin at least talk to their engineer to see what kind of impacts that it will have on these growth plans to this city. Maybe that's a good place to start as well.
Would you like to make a motion?
No,
No?
no.
I'll make the motion to direct Frank to reply to the City of Wyoming regarding our possible interest in the bicycle trail and our concerns regarding increased traffic. Anything else I should add, anyone?
Do you want to add the suggestion that Bob made about having our engineer talk to their engineer?
Sure.
Yeah, this is Rob. I would think so as well.
I'll second.
Any other additions or questions or discussion? Then I'll call for the vote.
Shelley, aye.
Janet, aye.
Sue, I.
Rob, aye.
Elsie, aye. And
Is this a council item or is this a joint item? Do we need the planning commission to vote too?
this would have gone to the planning commission. They would have made a recommendation to you. Since it is a joint meeting, we figured you can both make comments. But yes, it can be voted on by all.
Barb?
Barb Bobick, aye.
Ron, aye.
Bob, aye.
Chris, aye.
Yeah. Any other questions on that, Frank?
No, I think I have my direction for that one, so thanks, everyone.
Well, on to number 7, the CI moratorium study. In our additions, it's pages A1 through A12.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council and members of the Planning Commission. I am here this evening to lead us through our conversation on the CI district. And there is a PowerPoint, but the real substance of the information is within your packet here and our memo today. So over the course of the past 2 months, the Planning Commission and I have discussed sort of the existing uses within the CI district and then the potential future uses for the CI district. And as you know, the council enacted a moratorium in June of this year and directed staff to undertake this study. And so, you know, sort of as a summary for our members of council of what the Planning Commission has covered is we've talked about the existing uses on Lake Drive and the market demand for current uses and alternative uses and how we can incentivize high-value uses along that corridor. We've talked about ongoing concerns related to truck traffic and the impacts on residential property owners and nuisance conditions that are created by sort of the intersection of high industrial or high intensity use, high commercial uses with existing residential properties and agricultural properties. We've talked about very specifically the incompatibility between the CI district as it exists today and the neighboring residential uses, particularly those that border the west side of the district. And then in response to those particular policy issues, we've discussed implementing new definitions to better define what the existing and future desired uses are within the district. We've discussed and had significant conversation about the concern of further regulation within the district, creating legal nonconformities within existing businesses that are successful and thriving. And so as a sort of a summary, one of the things that we spent some time discussing was that when we create legal nonconformities, we create market incentives, or market disincentives, I should say, for expansion of existing buildings. Because when a CUP or a use is made legally nonconforming, it's no longer to expand beyond its existing footprint unless one of two things happen. Number one, the city may adopt a section of its ordinance permitting expansion of existing conditional uses. We are recommending that as an addition to your code because of the number of conditional uses that exist within the city. And number two, having a real reticence, there we go, for creation of non-conforming uses where we believe the use is efficient and well-functioning. And some examples of those uses that we have within the CI district include Dave's Hydrovac, North Pine Aggregate, Ryback Construction. Those uses are looking to expand. They are high-intensity industrial uses that are not necessarily consistent with the residential uses on the west side of the district, but all of those uses are located within the east side of your district. And so in talking about how do we support those businesses that are existing and thriving today, that are consistent with many of the policy goals that you have outlined for the CI district, while also protecting the developing residential area and the west side of the district, we have developed a two-district approach. And so we've called it the CI district, your original district that would live and breathe as it is today, and then a CI light. The CI light would impact the majority of would impact all of the west side of your existing CI district, and then the southeastern corner of the existing CI district as well. And that approach takes into account number one, not creating further legal nonconformities, while also granting further land use protections to the residential properties that border the west side of the district. So I think the first I'll run through a summary of where we've come in our conversations with the Planning Commission. Attached in your packet, starting, it's labeled A2 in red and number 2 in terms of our page numbers. We've started by creating definitions. And so within the CI district as it existed prior to our study, we did not have definitions of specific uses. And we've added them so that we can define the uses that exist today and then define the uses that we desire to see potentially within this new CI Light District in the future. Probably most notably, one of the significant concerns that the City Council raised in the course of adopting this moratorium was the development of contractors' yards with significant excavation, crushing, rubble operations. And a couple of distinctions are important. Number one, the City Council adopted a revision to its CI district in December of 2021, where excavation and crushing operations were prohibited at that point in time. So we have that control in place. But to be more clear about what the expectations are for the district, we've created two separate definitions that are essential here. We have a contractor shop, which is an establishment primarily engaged in the on-site or off-site provision of services for the construction, maintenance, cleaning, or repair of buildings, building components, and properties on a fee or contractual basis, and may include office for the purpose of such business. Such services may include, but are not limited to, plumbing, electrical, heating, and air conditioning, landscaping, roofing, painting, and general construction. So this type of use, a contractor shop, would be combined with an accessory use for a contractor yard limited or a contractor yard no limited. The limited contractor yard is restricted to limited material storage. So the piles are limited by performance standards that we'll sort of dive into further in our conversation tonight. And contemplates the storage of fleet vehicles, trailers, machinery, and seasonal equipment. So the parallel, the real life parallel to a contractor shop with a contractor yard limited is City View Electric. And that type of use for those types of services would be permitted on the in the new CI District Light. That's a working title, of course, subject to all of your input and conversation, but would be permitted within the CI District Light as a conditional use permit. And it would allow those types of businesses, I'd say akin to City View Electric, to grow on the west side of the district and then in the southeast portion of the existing CI district as well. Whereas a contractor yard allows for more significant machinery. It includes loaders, graders, bulldozers, scrapers, cranes, or similar, your broader equipment that has again has a broader impact to residential uses, and those would remain a permitted accessory use subject to a conditional use permit on your within your traditional CI district in the remaining north to southeast portion of Lake Drive. And so that was one of the significant concerns that was raised by council at the time of the moratorium. And that is part of our sort of process to create clarity when people are coming in for applications for new uses within the city. We've also created a number of new uses or more fully defined the uses within the definition sections. And these include limited production and processing, low impact, high technology manufacturing, machinery and equipment repair heavy. That wasn't previously defined, but we did go ahead and define that. And then light manufacturing. And we are seeing a demand from the marketplace standard for these types of manufacturing facilities. And when I draw your attention to, and this is on page A3, is that a limited production and processing site would be a type of use that is appropriate for sort of an industrial office complex. It would create the flexibility for fabrication of products or other sort of research development uses that are consistent with an office space, a retail space, or other sort of service-oriented use. So it wouldn't have a significant impact in terms of noise, sound, dust, those types of things on its neighbors. It would be good for an industrial complex, whereas your manufacturing light can have some more of those impacts, but again, are not going to be harmful to your surrounding residential. So your manufacturing light is contemplating a larger sort of square footage space. So those I have said a lot of words already tonight, and I'd be happy to continue with all of the words that I have said, or happy to answer questions along the way.
I wanted to clarify, this is Elizabeth, I wanted to clarify the area that Megan was talking about. I know that some of you didn't understand the area that we were talking about when we were talking about commercial light and commercial. What I have up on the screen is the zoning map. And when Megan was referring to commercial light, it would be the entire, what I call westerly side. And you would go from 141st, and you would make a line across 141st, and light would be 141st south to the southerly border, and everything north of 141st would be the CI district. I forget what you called it.
We're just calling it the CI district.
The
So there
CI
would be a
district,
light
okay, so
and
I
a
wanted to make sure.
district, yes.
So the remaining would be the CI district. And that's what we briefly talked about at the last meeting. So not having an east and west, but just having again, a westerly side, including the easterly side up through 141st, having that, the commercial light, and from 141st north to Century Fence and/or Potomac Street would be the CI district.
What's the business at the very southerly end of that, on 141st,
On the west side,
on the west side? I mean, you're talking about the west side, you know, from 141st north is going to be CI, right? What's the
Correct.
first business that's,
on the first business on the east side, it's not a business, it's a home, and that's Sue Copeland's home.
okay, and the one's up from that?
North from there, trying to think, I think there's a couple of, the insurance building, I think Mike Wood has a lot. I'm trying to think of these other ones. I wish I had the other map.
I mean, it's quite a distance to like Rybeck, right? Or no?
Let me bring up the aerial, because now
Isn't that auto sales shop there?
Vision.
What's,
Vision.
yes, it's Vision, that's what it is. It's Vision.
Vision
This is-
Auto.
This is Dave's High Pro is here. And then you have North Pine Aggregate, Forest Lake Contracting. Those all are North Semstone. All of those are in that CI district. Because they're all right in a row, you know what I mean, right in a row.
But this extends farther south than what I consider the high-impact people. Because I don't consider Sue Copeland's or why do we pick one?
Oh, it's arbitrary. I just quartered it. You know what I mean, the district, and I just said, okay, 145th is the mid-district, and the 5 businesses we were talking about are north of 141st, you know what I mean, on that side. So you can, you know what I mean, vary that line, but I just quartered it just like we did the freeway district.
And the east side, or the west side of Lake would be not CI.
It would not be CI, it would be the commercial light.
So are you saying, sorry, the east side, I'm sorry, the west side and south of 141st on, sorry, the west side and south of 141st on the east side is the CI light?
Correct.
And north of 141st on the east side is the CI?
Correct.
So there's 2, not
2.
4?
No, right. There's only 2 districts that's being proposed at this time.
Because the last meeting, we were thinking 4, right? I'm
Well,
just making
I
sure.
wasn't, we were kind of throwing things
Okay.
around, but this is where we landed.
Okay, great.
And so I think it may be helpful to talk about how we've constructed the light district and what the sort of the draft purpose is of the light district and the permitted uses that we are making a recommendation on, as well as the additional conditional uses that would be added. So the light district has a new definition and purpose associated with it, and that's on your page A5. This district is intended to provide a range of low-intensity industrial, commercial, restaurant, and retail uses compatible with nearby residential neighborhoods. The district excludes more intensive industrial uses while allowing light manufacturing uses such as research and development, low-impact high-technology manufacturing, biotechnology, small-scale distribution, commercial, office, and institutional uses. Access must be provided to a collector or arterial roadway as specified by the City of Columbus Comprehensive Plan. Within the existing CI district, as it stands today, uses A through F that are on here on your page 5 agricultural uses through accessory structures, actually through G, through municipal buildings. Those are all permitted uses as they are today. What we are recommending adding as permitted uses within this light district is offices with no outdoor storage, office showrooms with no outdoor storage, and limited production processing with no outdoor storage. Now, historically, the City of Columbus has always utilized a conditional use permit process, especially within non-sewer districts, as part of its planning and zoning process. And what we know about, from a development standpoint, is that by creating permitted uses and allowing permitted uses within your district, subject to performance standards, that you do incentivize the growth of those particular uses. And what we heard from the Planning Commission, from the City Council, was that offices and limited production processing, sort of as defined, are, number one, uses that are desirable within the district, and that they're also highly desirable in the marketplace. And so for that reason, we would recommend incorporating those as permitted uses within your district, because it is more likely to draw development that is consistent with those standards. Now, this is a deviation from the past practice of the city, and so certainly is deserving of significant conversation.
I'm happy to start off because I have strong opinions about this. I am not a fan of permitted uses. I think we have so many examples in Columbus of businesses that come to us defining themselves as one thing and we define them as another. And by bypassing the conditional use permit process, you bypass the opportunity to put some conditions on the use that then mitigate some of the concerns that get brought up. And so I don't think we have a problem with interest in this real estate. We have plenty of people who are asking and looking, and so I don't know that we need to incentivize anything. We could certainly come back and look at that if the market changes, but I would be strongly against adding these as permitted uses.
So are these permitted uses now?
They are not.
They are not.
No. Items A through G on the screen, ending in municipal buildings and facilities, are currently permitted uses. The H, I, and J would be additional uses that would be permitted. And again, the reason we make this recommendation is that listing a use as conditional rather than permitted, it may serve to discourage applicants from applying due to the cost and uncertainty related to the approval process. But this would be sort of the mechanism towards, it's a business development opportunity, right? It's a mechanism to drive this type of development, which we haven't seen in this district to this place in the city.
Okay, please clarify for me. So you're saying there are not any permitted uses in that district now?
The permitted uses that are in that district now are items A through G. So
Okay,
the
so
agricultural,
so we would just be adding
it would be H, I, and J would be,
offices, which is nothing.
yeah.
A showroom with no outdoor storage, which is good, and limited production, which is good too. Am I
And we're
correct?
not saying that we wouldn't have them, it was just that they would have to go through a CUP process. This would allow them to bypass the CUP process. So the question is whether or not going through a CUP is a disincentive to, putting a business in that area. And I would say, based on our current interest in that area, it's not a disincentive. And I don't like the idea of giving up the control we have of imposing conditions on a permit by making this a permitted use. They basically, they don't have to go through a planning commission review, they don't have to go through a public hearing, they don't have to go through anything, they just can establish a business.
Well, how does the city have any controls on them then?
They don't.
So this is Sue. Can I interrupt because I have a question relating to that?
Certainly.
If it was a permitted use, they still have standards that they have to comply to, don't they?
Yes, they still have standards, but they go through what you would call a site plan review. In other words, if they meet all of the conditions of the ordinance, then by right, they get to establish their business. So there's no additional conditions other than what is listed in the code. So there are no more conditions allowed. And I will say that, while you didn't mean permitted uses, I don't have anything against them. The only caveat I would have in this case is you cannot convert a house to an office without going through the CUP process. I would not want a conversion to happen under a permitted use. That's a lot of work, and there's a lot of things that need to be addressed if you're converting a house to a business. So newly established offices, if we were going to go down that road.
And just to quickly follow, we do have residential conversions as a conditional use
Okay.
in our next section, but yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
This is Barb. Janet, are you saying there is considerable interest in the CI district? I mean, because it was presented like nobody's coming. So are
Yeah.
there people truly interested?
I mean, we haven't seen a drop off in interest. I mean, Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's considered prime real estate. Now, we don't have offices or office showrooms coming in, but I don't think that's because they have to go through a CUP process. I think, or, you know, I don't think it's a disincentive. We had this discussion about the freeway district as well. And I just feel like the CUP process is not enough of a disincentive that I feel like we have to throw away our opportunity to be able to establish conditions, because you just don't know what's going to walk in the door. Yes, it might be an office with no outdoor storage, but, you know, 2 years from now, what qualifies as an office? I don't know. I mean, you know, and that's what we keep seeing. We keep seeing morphine of, you know, of ideas and different sorts of businesses evolving that defy our definitions. And I think that, you know, the CUP process allows us to look at each individual specifically and have them tell us, like, what is your business? How many customers do you have? Et cetera, et cetera. And you can decide whether or not those need additional conditions to make them compatible with the surrounding businesses and or residences. And when you make it a permitted use, you throw away that opportunity. And I think it's hard to define and to think about everything that might potentially come across the threshold of Columbus now or in the future.
Well, I can agree with that. Remember the wood chip place? They came in and they had one plan, then they had two plans, and then they were gonna stack it, then they're gonna haul it, then they weren't gonna do it. So if we hadn't had them in for meeting after meeting after meeting, and by the time they finally understood what they were going to build, and by the time we understood what they were going to build, a lot of information had changed. Their plans had changed, our understanding had changed. And I think we got a better building at the end and a better project because they couldn't just move in, they had to explain to us. And then they sold it before they moved in, so. But anyway, so in agreement with you, Janet, that's the value of that. Or we would have had a completely different project from where they started and where they end up.
And I can think of multiple examples of, you know, projects that we said no to, even though they defined themselves as, I mean, think about horticultural services. They said they were an office.
Right?
They were not, you know, not in our opinion, but that's what they said. That's why I really like the opportunity to go through the process, because it really gets everybody on the same page. And it also doesn't, you know, I feel like we're the elected officials that are acting on behalf of our citizens, and the staff are, you know, following the rules, but things are tough when, I mean, there's a lot of creativity out there, and I feel much more comfortable having everything go through the process so that we can really ask the questions that are relevant and then decide.
I think that's, those concepts, Elizabeth, do you present that to these people a lot of times that come in? Would you like to bring the concept in?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we offer to go through the concept review or the non-binding concept review almost to everyone. I mean, for the ones that we know, like a dog kennel, I mean, for the ones that we know are very straightforward, we know that it's, you know what I mean, and it's not a good use of everyone's time. But we offer the concept review to everyone because, in my opinion, it saves them money in the long run. If we don't charge for the concept plan, and then they get a really good idea of what they need to do. And if they don't want to do it, they haven't spent any money yet. For those who don't go through the process, it is, I won't say a risk, but they've spent a lot of money before they've talked to anybody.
And if it's a permitted use, there's no concept review because they get to come in.
Well, yeah, there's no concept review because it's by right. If you meet all the conditions, you're good to go. Kind of like a building permit. Building permits are, you know, they don't go through a review process. They come in, they walk in the front door, and we have a list of all the things that they need, and when they get all the things that's on the list, we give them the permit.
But, excuse me, this is Barb, you can't require anybody to have a concept review, is that correct?
That is correct.
So it's their choice not to do that.
Yes.
Anybody else? Any opinions?
Well, this is Sue. So 2 years ago, when I started, I would have said, leave them on. But after seeing the things that have come through over the last couple of years, I tend to agree with Janet that when you lose the control over what conditions are put on, we just don't know what we're going to get, even if they do meet standards. So I would be okay with moving those to the conditional use category.
Shelley?
I'm kind of on the fence on this one. I don't want to, it's kind of like when we talk about, are we turning away business, you know, before it even gets here? But I also understand what Janet's saying about the fact that we don't put things in place and then we get things that we don't want. Unfortunately, even with that, we get things that we don't want, such as the place that was going to do all the wood chipping and, you know, the people in Columbus were going to bring wood there and they were going to get it chipped up. And we fought and fought and fought about whether it was going to be dyed and that sort of thing. All that came to fruition and then they sold it to a business that is got stuff in their parking lot. If you remember, the looks of that was supposed to be landscaping and having people walk through and see how lovely it's going to look, with the chips and all that sort of thing. And instead, now we have things that are, at this point, are not fenced. I don't know if it's going to be, but even with the permitting process, we don't.
But that's an enforcement issue. I mean, we have the conditions in there, so, you mean, you're not incorrect, but that's an enforcement issue. That's not I mean, if you don't have the conditions in there, you can't enforce anything. So, a different problem, but I think,
I guess what I'm saying is that we held back and said you can't start your business unless you have XYZ. Before they even started it, they came in and sold it to somebody else that had a completely different mindset. And whether you enforce it or not, it's not working. The permitting thing is not really working.
but if you don't have the ability to put in conditions, I mean, you don't have the option of enforcing or not enforcing. It just is what it is.
Do you think that it keeps people from, businesses from wanting to come here because they know that they're going to have to go through the permitting prospect?
In the past, offices has not been one of the uses on the list. That is not what has gravitated or made contractor shops come to this district. In the past, the draw to this district has been outdoor storage. Outdoor storage is very limited in other communities, and so what has drawn most of the businesses was the opportunity to have outdoor storage.
But do you think that if there was interest in somebody to establish an office or an office showroom, that going through a CUP process would scare them away? Has that been your experience? I mean, have you had people, whether it's offices or anything else, have you had businesses come in and say, oh, sorry, if we have to go through a CUP process and we're going to go down the road?
They have not said that to me, and I think that the one opportunity that you had before you as going through this process, I think it was understood by Mr. Wood that he would have to go through a CUP process, and he is the one who asked to have office as a use in the district.
So how do we add office without making it a permitted use? What do we change?
You may make it a conditional use.
And I think it's on the list.
Yeah.
You mean lower on the list?
So that takes that argument off the table. They can have it.
Yeah, I'm not saying that these shouldn't be allowed. I'm saying that they should be allowed as a conditional use, not a permitted use.
This is Bob. My experience as a developer is that most developers would prefer to go through a permitted use than a conditional use permit because it's easier entry and it's less expensive to develop. And related to Columbus, now that's a hard question if it's turning people away. It sounds like we're really focusing more on organic growth than we are strategic growth. So we're waiting for the developers to come to us with their proposed ideas, and then we say yes or no through the CUP. That's different than I think the challenge is for the EDA, where you're trying to attract new business to the area. So if you're trying to attract new business, you want the ease of entry to be a little less stringent, but by taking everything and eliminating all permitted use, that's sending a counter message to developers. So it just depends on what kind of growth you want.
Mr. Mayor, I believe Council Member Bush has his hand raised.
Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. No, I had it up for a little while and I just wanted to, share about like permitted uses. And actually, Bob, I think nailed it on the head. I think when developers are coming to town to seek areas, they're looking at permitted uses. And it might even not be a call to Elizabeth. They just see, okay, no permitted uses, let's move to the next town, type of thing. So some developers want to move through a fairly fast process rather than something that's going to drag them out. So maybe if we set a, at least a minimal baseline for what might be permitted there. I guess that's what I was going to share there. So
Okay, but if they're listed as conditional uses, so the developer's looking through the paper and he says, oh, I'm gonna build a showroom and I'll do some limited processing and build a pedestrian trail. Well, he can do that if he wants. He just has to come in, have his hearing, and do what he says he's going to do. Because the trouble is we are always being lied to or creatively described, we could say. They say one thing and you end up with something else, and the guy moves on and we're stuck looking at it for 50 more years.
but I think even with that other process, and Janet said it's an enforcement issue, and it might be, we tried to go there with CSD. I mean, they still don't have their fence up, and that was a CUP, if I'm correct.
Yeah, but I guess it's a different problem. I'm not suggesting that that isn't an issue, because it is, but it's a different problem. You have an ability to address it. We just have not addressed it. And Elizabeth would have to go into the whys of that. I don't know the whys of that. But if you don't have an ability to put in conditions, then it is what it is. That's all I'm saying. And I think Jesse is right. We've had some very creative maneuvering in the past. And I don't, you just heard Elizabeth say that the one developer, if you want to call him that, who's interested in doing an office is fine with doing it through a CUP. I just don't think we have experienced a downturn in interest in our area, either on Lake Drive or in the Freeway District. I don't think the CUP process has been a disincentive. We've had, 2 or 3 years of record applications. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't reconsider it if we see that change, but for now, I don't know that in my opinion, we only have something to lose, we have nothing to gain.
So what do we do? Think about it? Megan, how long till our next meeting? Or when do you want an answer?
Well, so, I think that the conversation has been very helpful, and I think in particular the conversation about strategic rather than organic growth is an important one. And perhaps maybe what the further thought is, let's continue our conversation and talk about the performance standards that we're recommending for this district and see if that pushes you one way or another, whether you would feel comfortable that a building that came in as a permitted use, subject to the performance standards, would meet what your expectations are for the space. And then I think the other thing to sort of strategically think about is, so we've suggested these uses because they are low impact and they tend to be sort of non-controversial uses. But perhaps there are other uses from our list of definitions, or that we all even go through now, that you really want to incentivize the growth of within this district, that you'd like to see more of built. And those certainly then should be considered potentially through that development lens, through that business, that growth strategic lens. So moving on to that, let's talk about the additional uses that we're bringing in into the district as a whole. So artisan shops is a new definition and a new use. It's being deployed throughout cities in your area. And it's a low impact use. It's a retail store that sells artworks and other handcrafted items. It can also be along the lines of a furniture store, but is being readily adopted in your surrounding cities. And so for that reason, we included it as one of the conditional uses within the district, a standalone use. We've also included the opportunity for breweries within the area, also very common within a commercial industrial district. We recognize that the market forces of developing a brewery within this area are fairly limited based upon the district status as a non-sewer district, but nonetheless, we think from a future-looking perspective, it makes sense to add it. We have the contractor shops called out specifically here with accessory contractor yard limited. And then communication towers, those were existing uses already within the district. We've added also catering businesses. This is a use that we think could be a viable new use within this district, because we are seeing more and more number one, the rise of Uber Eats and its progeny has created space for the idea of commercial kitchens that are producing food for delivery that may not have a restaurant component. So those commercial kitchens could fall within this catering business CUP. It also can be for event providers. So if for just true catering, traditional catering services. And then thirdly, it also serves as a home base for food trucks. And the city is well located to provide a catering kitchen for sort of the pre-prep for food truck businesses that are operating in cities around Columbus and then within Columbus itself. We see that this is a good sort of expansion of a potential use that has limited impacts and can bring in additional jobs and again, be another form of business for the city to invest in. We've also added, so gasoline sales and related convenience retail sales and car wash was already an existing CUP within the district. Greenhouses was existing. We've added this low impact, high technology manufacturing. That is a new included definition. It's of course back there on page 3. It's an establishment that's engaged in the manufacture or assembly of high value added technology products in a manner that does not create negative impacts on surrounding uses due to odors, smoke, dust, noise, vibration, or other factors. Examples of high technology manufacturing that may be also low impact include manufacture or assembly of computer components and medical devices. That is a definition that we are seeing utilized within cities in the surrounding area. Licensed daycare facilities were always commercial uses within the CI district. We've added the manufacturing light definition, which again restricts processing of raw materials. That's a significant definitional change there. So again, all geared towards more low impact industrial and commercial uses based upon the surrounding residential. Medical uses are an added use. Mortuaries were an existing CUP. We have our office showroom with exterior storage. So this would be perhaps like your granite sales facility, something like that. Oftentimes those facilities do utilize exterior storage. And then recreation facility commercial. Another use that is regularly found within cities' commercial industrial districts. It's a place designed and equipped for the conduct of sports, leisure time activities, and their customary and usual recreation activities operate as a business and open to the public for a fee. Vertical endeavors would be a good example of a recreation facility commercial or paintball facility, things like that. That's what's contemplated by that definition, and we've created it as a new conditional use within the district. Restaurants and cafes were existing. Retail stores and shops were existing. We have a CUP for residential conversions to commercial, retail, or office uses. So those are for those existing residential properties that were grandfathered in to this district that may be interested in converting to an office use, for example. One of the things that we are attempting to regulate by utilizing this particular type of CUP is so that you don't have a home that has been converted, that is being used as an office but doesn't have appropriate parking for visitors, for clients, and for employees. We have slightly modified the definition here, vehicle sales and repair businesses and body shops. All of those uses are currently CUPs within the district, and you have a number of them. But we clarified that that does not allow salvage operations or junkyards, and salvage operations is specifically now defined within the code. Veterinary clinics was an existing CUP use. Warehousing and storage facilities, an existing CUP use. A wholesale establishment, that's a slightly broadened use that we've incorporated with a definition here. Provides storage, distribution, and sale of merchandise and bulk goods, including mail order and catalog sales, importing, wholesale, or retail sale of goods received by an establishment, but generally not sale of goods for individual consumption. We've added that as a conditional use within the district. And then lastly, we've added an expansion of nonconforming uses subject to the standards in section 7A blank, because we'll discuss that, that section sort of after we get through the two districts here. But one of the important things to keep in mind is that part of the reason we've added these additional uses here is that we are restricting what the historic use of the CI district has been. And so we want to take into account, number one, what the needs are of the district, but also take into account, sort of what the market pressures are for the existing property owners there, and ensure that there are a broad variety of uses that are acceptable to the city, that are acceptable to the surrounding residential, but that also ensure strong market viability for those properties that have yet to be developed. And with that in mind, we have outlined a number of new performance standards for the district that are consistent with these goals. And those performance standards are outlined on page A7 of your packet here. So first and foremost, the CI district has always had district performance standards, and those have been replicated here for the CI Light. But what we've added is specifically new standards for outdoor display and screening. And number one, we've excluded from the definition of outdoor storage any display of finished product for direct retail sale or lease are not subject to screening requirements. And that would be consistent with how many of the existing, for example, the auto dealerships or trailer sales sites function today. But then for all other outdoor storage, we have new limitations and requirements. So number one, the outdoor storage must have a direct relationship to the primary use of the site. Number two, the storage must be located in the side yard or the rear yard. The outdoor storage cannot be within a driveway or maneuvering area, right? So that's like your standard fire safety issue. And then, except as approved by conditional use permit, outdoor storage may not exceed 30% of the site, excluding retail products sold outdoors and fleet vehicles. And so the intention of this here is to, again, incentivize the building out of your CI district as compared to its sort of exclusive use for outdoor storage of things like material piles. But this definition and this language specifically does not contemplate screening or treating as storage fleet vehicles or again, products that are available for sale, period. And then with that, we have created outdoor storage screening standards. And the screening standards that you'll find highlighted on pages 7 and 8 of your packet very much mirror the screening standards that you utilize for your light industrial district elsewhere in the city. So they will look familiar to you in that way.
Megan, this is Bob. If I can ask
Yes.
a question?
Mm-hmm.
Can you further define what you mean by incentivize? Because that can take many different approaches to that.
Absolutely. Can you remind my feeble brain in which context I used the word incentivize?
As you were talking about the performance standards, and you used it earlier too when you were talking about the CI Light area to incentivize growth into those districts. And so I'm just trying to, because when I hear incentivize, that's something that would be in a toolbox for a city to offer to a developer or a builder.
That would be a great way to define how I intended to utilize that word. No, and so, and I would say that maybe a clearer way to say it is in exchange for limiting some of the flexibility that existed within the existing CI district, we are recommending a broader list of uses that are more consistent with the surrounding residential, so that there are still, there's still creates a market space for use of land within the CI Light District, the proposed CI Light District. And furthermore, that the standards that we have outlined recognize in particular, the screening and the performance standards recognize that these are less intense uses, and so they require less significant setbacks, things of that nature. And that is, and those revisions to your setback standards are also found on page 8 there. And we can run through those quickly, just because we are having this conversation at this point in time. So originally, within the CI district, the setback standards from the right-of-way, from Lake Drive, was 75 feet. And we've reduced that to 35. We're proposing a reduction here to 35 feet. And similarly, the rear yard setback for this district was 35 feet, and we're proposing a 10-foot rear yard setback. And again, that's reflective that these are the uses that are would be conditional uses within the district are simply less intense than the original CI district.
So I get it now. So when you say incentivize, you're actually proposing flexible performance standards to allow for an incentive to come into a district.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Frank, I have a question for you as well. This is Bob. So from a design standard aspect, do you consider ornamentals and plantings and landscaping as part of the design standard for a development in a particular district? Or is it simply just a building?
Sorry, I'm not quite following the question.
Okay, so like if a developer comes in to build an office project and they don't want to put in all of the design standard criteria, but they offset it with additional landscaping to make it more appeasable, make it more aesthetic. Is that something that you would allow through the design standard? Or is it simply just focused here through the performance standard?
No, it wouldn't be a design standard, it'd be more towards the performance standard.
Okay.
Well, so once again, I clearly have made the room quiet with too much talking on my part. But perhaps we can, so since I've talked at length, perhaps I can ask you some questions so that we can have some more conversation about the sort of the path forward for the ordinance. So with regard to the uses that are recommended on page A6, we went through and we discussed those uses that would be additional to the district, that would be called out as new sort of flexible potential uses for properties within the district. Any thoughts or objections to those uses or concerns or wish for further conversation about them?
This is Janet. I don't have any concerns about the new ones. I did have one question. So you're seeing some mortuaries now that have associated crematoriums. Is there a very clear line between a mortuary and a mortuary with a crematorium? I'm not so sure we want a crematorium on Lake Drive.
Yeah, I believe that the code language in the definitions speaks to that, but if it does not, we'll make sure that that is somehow called out, is either clarified in the definition or better addressed here. Mr. Mayor, I believe that Councilmember Bush has his hand up.
Jesse,
I'm sorry.
Rob has his hand
Oh,
up.
go ahead, Rob.
I don't think I ever took it down. I apologize.
We need a little bell that rings or something. We're all reading so hard, we don't see the hand waving.
Well, it's hard to see when the windows are small. Sorry. I didn't notice it either.
I have on the bottom of page 6, Megan, letter B, yard waste. This is a interim use, light industrial. Yard waste with shrubbery, grass and leaves, blah, 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 composting. We went through all of that one time, Elizabeth, and it was like having a barnyard in your living room. So let's get rid of it. Why even ask for it? Why allow it? The guy came in, he had stories as high as you could hear, and he just had semi-loads of rotted grass that drove the neighbors crazy for miles around in every direction. If we have limited space and limited opportunity, let's get rid of it and let them use their land for something different, better than that. Anybody disagree? You remember the smell? You could smell it from City Hall on a bad day.
It was the ammonia smell. Yep.
And I say, strike it. Anybody oppose that opinion?
I don't.
It's just not necessary, you're asking for it. And I even have a question about outdoor music theaters. If you think the clanging of the dump truck doors are bothering you now, have somebody put an amphitheater in there, and you'll wish you never had. You could even hear trout air 5 miles away across the swamp. And now it's more populated and more homes and more businesses. So just get rid of it. If you want to go to the theater, head downtown. Because the part of the object of this whole exercise is to reduce the number of problems in the future. And with either one of those two items, I think you're just asking for it. And maybe it would never happen, but we did have, well, we have had both of them in the past. But I'd say find something different for the location. Anybody?
I agree. I mean, for both of those things, I didn't know that we'd gotten to that yet, but I don't disagree with anything you said.
Ron, how about you? You're a rock and roller.
I didn't smell the grass years ago, but I'll go along with it. I mean, it's compost or whatever. The amphitheater, I'll go along, get rid of that.
You know, how many miles is that? Only 5 miles up and down that corridor, or 3 miles? That's not a lot of space.
Definitely not a Woodstock.
So anyway, that's my thought on those two issues.
This is Bob. I like your idea of the strategic definition of incentivized through flexible standards. And I think that section is pretty awesome. I think it's a great way to move forward.
So Megan, help me understand, if you end up with a permitted use, there is no give and take, like what Bob was suggesting. They meet it or they don't meet it, but there's no negotiating. Is that right? Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, I think that's true. The standards will apply to them just like they apply to an applicant coming through for a CUP. They are going to have to show staff in the site plan review process that, the materials are are consistent with the performance standards and that there's a combination of sort of the landscaping. And then of course, that they also meet the display and screening standards. So one's a purpose-driven standard, but the display and screening standards are more specific. And they're more specific because they have broader impacts. And so there's flexibility given with one and more structure with the other.
Including setbacks.
But what you were suggesting is kind of like with a PUD process where,
Well, and I mean, I think that's an important note for all of this, is that, these are the structures of your ordinance as they stand, and as proposed here. There's flexibility built in here, but the PD process does always provide additional flexibility along the way, albeit at increased cost. And our goal for our conversation tonight really is to seek direction from this joint body here about whether this ordinance is in shape to be moved forward to a public hearing, whether it is where it's sort of ready for prime time, if you will. And ready to move forward to a public hearing at the Planning Commission where, of course, additional public comment will be taken and then move on to, with a recommendation to the City Council. Or if there's additional work to be done, and things that you would want us to investigate, and we can provide that information by memorandum, or we can provide it, of course, through an additional meeting. This moratorium went into place in June of this year. We have a year. However, we did promise this delivered product to you by the end of 2022. And so that's our goal, is to get that through. Our timeline's pretty short for doing that and meeting our public hearing deadlines and our notice requirements. And so, I think what I heard from, I would say, the majority of this body was that the permitted uses are problematic. And that perhaps more time needs to be given to look at the performance standards and screening standards to see if that would be a sufficient guard against concerns. But if not, then, sort of the path forward, I think, is to incorporate those uses that we've recommended be permitted, incorporate them within your conditional uses so you still have them within your broad category of choices that a person could utilize within the district. And then and then talk specifically about any specific concerns you have for the language, and if that's the direction of this joint body, then we would move forward to requesting that the City Council call for a public hearing, or we can work through one more joint meeting if we have some specific guidelines. Just trying to think about what your options might be here.
So here's what I feel. This is we just got this tonight. We didn't get it in advance to look at. So it's hard for me to look at it and not have some time to sort of noodle some of the, and not that we haven't talked about some of these things, we definitely have, but it's helpful to have it kind of all sitting in front. I mean, you know how I feel about the permitted use. Most of what's here I really like. But we haven't talked about the last few pages yet, and I'm just wondering if, having a week, between now and our next council meeting or whenever you want to do this again, gives people an opportunity to really look at this carefully and either formulate additional questions or our work through. The other thing that would be super helpful to me is if we had a map of Lake Drive with the businesses so that we can actually see which businesses are where and how this cuts, you know, into those existing businesses and what lots are open still. That would be helpful too.
We can absolutely prepare that. Elizabeth, do you have, what does our calendar look like for a second follow-up meeting on this?
So looking at the calendar, I think this would be on the calendar for the second meeting in December, as we do have the next planning commission meeting has 2 applications, or at least 2 hearings, I would say. So it would be the same meeting that, will be the same lineup as tonight. It will be the commercial, let's say, daycare or dog daycare training and such. And then we can continue our discussion in the CI district
On the 21st.
on the 21st.
Can I suggest, though, that this become, you know, top priority going in? You know, we really should, we promised that we would have this in place faster than the dog daycare or the
We can
other
certainly,
moratorium. I mean, I just feel like this should be on the top of the list. We can push this forward.
so why don't we do this? We'll put this at the top of, it'll be the first topic. And if we are having a great conversation and we can put off the dog kennel to January, because there won't be any other meetings. There's only 2 more meetings for December. So we can certainly do that.
I mean, the other option, and planning commissioners, please weigh in. I mean, I don't know, maybe you guys feel like this is just fine and you don't need to see it again, and we can do this at our council meeting next week, and then decide if we're going to call for a public hearing. That might just push up. I mean, I'm not saying that that's how you should be, but I'm not hearing a lot of input, so I'm taking that to mean you're okay with it. But I don't want to assume. And I don't want to be holding things up, because I agree with Shelley. We need to make this a priority. So I'm just thinking that if that is truly the case, then we might be able to push, you know, gain a week's time by not having another joint meeting.
This is Bob. I've given my input, and I don't see any additional need to meet
Yeah.
in that regard.
This is Barb. Jesse, do you want, on page A11, you want those 2 things to be struck for interim uses also? B and C?
The outdoor facility and the yard waste?
Yeah.
On A11.
Yep. I think so.
In addition to what has been presented here, is the light commercial and the commercial, where that line is drawn, is that also need to be firmed up? Because I don't feel comfortable with the arbitrary decision, and part of it is because I don't know what businesses are affected. You know, there was comment that we did not want to make people non-conforming legal, and to me, that's what I really want to accomplish with that. And I want the district to be more evenly governed so that everybody's got a fair shake at getting people to come and buy their piece of property. So in addition to knowing what businesses are in that area, I just want to know where that line's going to be drawn, because I looked at the map, I'm trying to figure out, like, if you changed it to 145th, you know, what would that entail, and would that then make somebody non-conforming legal? So those are the types of questions I have when I'm looking at this.
Yeah, if you did 145th, you leave out Dave's High Pro.
You live out what?
Dave's High Pro. Dave's High Pro is south of 145th.
Okay.
So, but we can certainly give you we can bring back a map. There's, you know what I mean, no problem with doing that, or with the businesses in it.
And is this based on roads, we have to choose a road?
You do not have to choose a road, it's just,
Okay.
And, excuse me, this is Barb. For the commercial industrial area, that area won't allow any more businesses that have huge piles, or will they still be allowed? Or crushing or anything like that? I mean, because that is really an environmental issue. Cement, we already have a cement plant, we have an asphalt plant. And if people don't want to believe it, those particulate matter spread out for 5 or 6 miles. So to me, it's a real concern. So is that allowed in this, the way this is written?
my understanding is there is no more, as far as the cement or stone, we don't allow that any longer. And I think the prohibition of crushing will eliminate big piles, and then your conditions for performance standards for any future businesses in the commercial industrial district will limit how much, what I would say, dust blowing and particulate matter, if you even allow piles to a much lower height. I mean, that's when your performance standards come in.
Right, and to round out Commissioner Logren's point, you know, there are a number of we haven't made it through the entirety of the packet yet this evening, and so what I can give is sort of a quick summary that certainly the Planning Commission has heard me talk about with all of my many words at our previous meetings is what we're recommending for what you could call the CI district or the CI heavy district, the second district compared to the light district, is essentially the existing district as it stands today, with the additional uses that we incorporated within the light district, subject to more restrictive performance standards because they are a more intense use. And then we also do allow that manufacturing heavy and as well as the more intense contractor yard use that has the larger machinery that would be available to those businesses. And that's consistent with their existing operations today, again, with the goal of not creating those legal nonconformities. And the final point on the legal nonconformities is that, you know, if this commission and the city council were to determine that they were to draw the line at 145th, that separate the districts accordingly there, and that there was a facility that was made legally nonconforming, we are recommending, because of the use of CUPs throughout the city, that the city adopt a provision in its zoning ordinance that allows the city council to permit expansion of a legal nonconforming use if the commission makes specific findings in addition to the standard CUP findings. And those findings are related to, you know, how the site functions, but it does create sort of an opportunity for an existing business that the city, you know, would be legally nonconforming that has an existing CUP that would want to expand. This allows another mechanism for the city council to have review of their site plan, to have review through a standard CUP process plus this expansion CUP process and say, yes, we believe based upon the information presented to us, it's appropriate for them to expand. And it's a mechanism that the central cities oftentimes utilize to not create these hard lines in creating legal nonconformities and disincentivizing investment in those businesses. So we do have another mechanism for you to utilize if there is a legal nonconformity created through this zoning amendment process. And we certainly could turn around a memo that addresses the concerns over permitted versus conditional uses with some site plans that would show you what a permitted use could come in as within the district. We can turn around the zoning, the map that shows what businesses are in place at this point in time and what their status is and what they would fall under with our existing definitions for your consideration. And we can do that, via a memo to the joint board or to a memo to council for further conversation. And I say this again because if this joint body meets on the 21st, we will not make the end of the year deadline. However, that is of course at your discretion.
So this is Sue. I do have one question, well, a couple. But Megan, can you repeat what you just said, that what would happen if we don't do something by the 21st, that we would not meet our deadline?
Our self-imposed.
Our self-imposed deadline, to be very clear. The council has through, the moratorium will remain in place until June of 2023, unless the city council, before that makes amendments in response to the zoning study that we've conducted.
Okay. Yeah, and I do understand that it's a self-imposed, and I think it's important also, as Shelley and Janet mentioned, that this was always a priority to us to get it done as quickly as possible. But I did want to say thank you to Megan and the Planning Commission for a great job on putting this together so quickly. I really feel like it's comprehensive. It looks very good. I don't see anything that is a showstopper that would really, hinder us staying on our timeline. So I just wanted to give that feedback. But my only other question is, are you going to, or have you had Dean or any of the other planning consultants review this?
So Jake Steen with our office did review this as we went through drafting, and then we certainly have discussed the policy choices with Dean along the way as well.
Okay, all right, thank you.
This is Ron, of the Planning Commission. I kind of go along with what Bob said. I think our group has kind of met our goal, and we put it out here, and I think it's up to the council to, maybe they can get this done before the first of the year.
So I'm hearing that there isn't a need for another joint meeting, and do we think having the time between now and next Wednesday's council meeting, could we look at this with the additional information we've asked for and be able to either tweak it or say, yep, it's good, let's go for a public hearing, and then we should be able to meet that deadline? I mean, that's what I would propose.
It's Monday.
Oh, good grief. That's right. It's Thanksgiving, isn't it? Well, I don't know. How quickly can you get the materials that we've asked for to us?
It was the map.
Just a map. I think we can get that put together by Friday. Today's Wednesday, right? Yeah.
Today's Wednesday.
Almost Thursday.
Yep, exactly.
Keep going, and it will
I
be
know.
Thursday.
Keep talking, Megan. Yep. No, we can get that to you by Friday, and we can also, what also might be helpful is that, we have this in memo form at this point in time, but what we can do is just put it into sort of a draft ordinance so you can see it, like, here's what it is. Here is the light district, here is the CI district, and then the map about how they lay out. See how it would show up in the code so that you can review it sort of in that context, if that's helpful.
You think by Monday's meeting?
I think the larger lifting was with Frank. There was more asks for his stuff than the CI district.
I didn't follow what you just said, I'm sorry.
I think that was the only task, was the map. I think the more labor intense was with Frank, and we have a month for that.
Oh, on the animal thing.
On the, well,
Yeah, yeah, okay, got it. So let's shoot for Monday.
My question to the council is, if we're going to do the CI district, should we, and I know they're all running together, you know what I mean, but we had indicated to Jessica that we were setting aside an hour at each council meeting for residential zone business. So are we setting 2 hours? What, you know what I mean, as far as the council meeting, are we, I don't know if, I don't know how long it's going to take at the council meeting on Monday to talk about the CI district, but are we dedicating time for both of them? And
Can we put her off for 2 weeks?
I'm just asking because that one does have a deadline,
Oh.
and we said we were going to, you know, let the deadline run out, but I just want to let you know, you mean, we're running up against a couple of different deadlines. I realize this is the higher priority, but
Quick question, with Jessica's school schedule, is she available Monday nights? I'm not 100% sure, I just wanted to double check.
I think, you know what I mean, I think she's familiar with the schedule.
Okay, just making sure.
What else is on our
Oh,
agenda?
yeah, how bad's the agenda?
You know, honestly, I don't kind of look at it until like Thursday, you know, I have a pile of things, but I have not looked at it to say, okay, this is all that we need to do. I know that there's no planning applications other than these ordinances. I do know that you have animal control, because we invited Britt Harmon to Zoom in to talk about the animal control ordinance. So, well, I don't know how long that will take. She is available that night, so she is planning to Zoom in to talk about that ordinance. So we can rearrange things, but in priority, but we'll make sure the CI district gets the highest, and then we'll try to work it, you know, so that we're not here till midnight.
Yeah, thank you. All right, that's the plan, right?
Very good. Thank you for your time tonight.
Anything else, Megan?
No, thank you for your time this evening. Appreciate it.
Oh. Then let's do public open forum. Anyone want to speak? Please come up and pull the mic real close.
Hi, I'm Dan Friedner, commercial real estate broker with Newmark. I am an industrial specialist, and I live in Lindstrom. A few things I wanted to say based on everything that was discussed tonight is, first thing is, I strongly oppose the increase of the CI Light District moving across Lake Drive. I represent Don Waldock, who's listening tonight. I also represent Dave Ryback, who's also listening. If you look at the map, excuse me, if you look at the map and you start at 141st on the east side and you come down, that would affect Ryback. It would affect, I can give you, it won't take me too long, Mobile Mini, Ryback, Bergens, Waldock, Custom Finishing Industries, Central Landscaping. The purpose of staying on the west side of Lake Drive originally was because it was abutting residential. If you jump across to the east side, there is no residential over there. That was the point of keeping it one side to the other. I believe there's a house at 135th. Elizabeth might be able to verify that, but there's really no other residential over there. So why are we expanding this? I don't understand. It's kind of a question. Secondly, regarding excuse me, regarding the CI Light district, we would like to request that it's 50% coverage on the outdoor storage rather than 30, like Megan had proposed. And really because, as Janet had said, we have to come, the applicants have to come and ask for conditional uses. So you can put conditions if once you see the site plan and what they're storing. So I would just like less regulations on the CI Light. And the final thing I want to say is I really appreciate Shelley trying to hurry this along because it is costing people money. I had all of the properties for Don and John Waldock under contract, and all those buyers have left. It was millions of dollars worth of sales. So it's costing people real money here. So, thank you.
Anything else from anyone? We'll move on to the planning commissioner's report. Barb?
I have nothing.
Ron?
Ron, nothing?
Bob?
Nothing here.
Chris?
Nothing.
Anyone else have anything to say that hasn't been said? And then I'll make the motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second it. Ron?
It's moved and seconded. I'll call for a roll call vote.
Shelley, aye.
Janet, I.
Sue, I.
Bob? Barb?
Barb, aye.
Ron,
Rob,
aye.
aye. Sorry.
Bye-bye.
Chris, aye.
All right, our meeting's adjourned.